Hey all, Taves here, back playing some more Planet Zoo. So this is another one-off habitat. So as we said last week, we're just kind of testing out new things, doing a little bit of experimentation. This one is actually inspired by, well, sort of inspired by a couple of things. Inspired by this wall that you can see in the background, which was created by Haribo, which is an amazing little kind of prop and little. He's made a little pack. I think it's a he anyway. A little pack of different wall textures and stuff. So I'm just kind of adapting that for my own purposes. Link to Haribo in the description. Also, an amazing content creator has got an amazing zoo going on. So do check that out. But yeah, so we're sort of adapting that. So it's basically like a dry stone wall effect. Yeah, and this was sort of inspired by the fact that as you'll have seen from the title, this is an Okapi habitat. Okapis are only found in the Congo, in a very, very small part of the Congo as well. They are very, very endangered. And so this was inspired by, I did a bit of Googling of Congolese architecture. And Congolese architecture is kind of a mix between the traditional kind of pygmy architecture, so sort of mud huts and clay buildings and wooden structures and that sort of thing, and what you see in the very few examples of kind of modern Congolese architecture is a blend between that and kind of more modern aspects like glass and metal. So that's sort of what we're going for here. The idea was to kind of make it a fairly small and simple habitat. I have managed this time to get it to a reasonable piece count. So this will be both on the workshop as a park file as well as a habitat blueprint. So you'll be able to upload it straight into your own parks if you want to do that. So here we kind of see that mix of the real kind of roughness of that brick texture, that kind of mud and wood and stone texture, and then this kind of where this meets the kind of modern with this glass thing. So this is the sort of the point of this whole thing, or this is the sort of architectural idea of this. So you'll see in a second, I'm copying round to make these kind of semicircular shelter buildings, which I then kind of halve, which we'll see me do in a second. So just trying to get the position of that stuff right. So here I've halved it. And now I'm sort of thinking, okay, so I want this kind of clash between the modern and almost like the rough and the clean. So I'm using, and the art pieces actually work really well for just real clean surfaces. So they almost look like painted surfaces here. So we've got this kind of semicircular thing, just cleaning up the edges a bit. And you can see I've kind of done like I can't remember the pieces there, the wood, where you get that really interesting wooden texture on the inside, almost like a stable effect. So there's the kind of bridge. Glass is often used in architecture as a bridge between kind of two styles and two eras. So that's what I've done there, is this kind of little bridge between the rough parts of the stone and then the cleaner parts of what are supposed to be like plaster. So yeah, just adding some detail into the windows. I'm quite happy with the way this turned out. It's a fairly small building, as I said, going from the kind of the grand scale of the elephant habitat we had in the last episode to something much smaller this time, but probably equally as detailed and hopefully equally as rich. I tried to kind of not go too crazy with it. I want these one-off habitats to feel a bit like a bit more like they would fit into your zoos and not need to have kind of this whole thing growing around them. So yeah, just putting in some flooring. Now we're going to look towards how we cut out a space. So a doorway needs to go through. I actually ended up doing two of these kind of mirrored side by side. So the blueprint on the workshop is actually kind of technically two habitats, but the barriers are there on one side, obviously, because you're gonna have one gate. But you'll see in a minute how I've got round that, and you'll just need to kind of drop back in the barrier sections on the other half, or just use half of it if you want to only use half. It'll work both ways. So yeah, just adding a bit more detail in, we end up kind of making this look like a gate. It's not entirely sensible, you'll see in a second, but it's supposed to be, again, fairly minimalist. I didn't want to go too nuts with this one. Okapis are actually kind of a really interesting animal because they're, as I said, they're very rare. They're quite a solitary animal, so from all the research I've done, but it's quite unusual even to see more than one in the wild. I mean, obviously it's very unusual to see them in the wild at all. I think they're only discovered right at the turn of the 19th century, or sorry, the 20th century. We didn't really know they existed. Obviously they're a relative of the giraffe, kind of weird mix between a horse and a giraffe. I guess more like a zebra and a giraffe. And they've got that long tongue, so apparently their tongue can reach up to 18 inches, and they have an amazing ability to be able to lick their own nose and lick their own eyelids, which is I guess a gift. Guess a gift is nature's given them. So yeah, I'm just sort of struggling at this point. I had a couple of issues trying to get things lined up, not sure why. I'm putting in this kind of the idea of this sliding barn door. So there's only this entrance into this shelter building. So the idea being that when the keepers are closing them up, they just slide this door across, slide the bar over. It doesn't actually make sense because the bar, it doesn't kind of fasten properly, because obviously if you imagine that door sliding, the bar would slide over as well. So just adding in a couple of windows. Obviously they're not being any other way in and out of this, and with anything that's kind of I guess any kind of animal that's like this sort of thing, there's going to be some stinkiness in there, so thought a couple of open windows would make a lot of sense. So yeah, just doing that. Didn't want to go too heavily on the detail on this, just fairly keeping it simple, the idea of it, these kind of stays being there. Then we get onto the roof. I actually played around with a couple of different options for the roof. Initially, I was looking at like a thatch roof. A thatch is very difficult to use, I find, if you're not kind of following the grid. So if you're doing a nice rounded shape, thatch works really well. But if you're doing anything that's kind of free flow, like what I'm doing here, then it's really difficult. Actually, basically doing a semicircle is a real challenge with the thatch. Or any of the set roof pieces. So we went with a really clean, simple roof. Again, keeping the modern bit. Again, I've got that bridge between the modern and the stonework, which is the glass. So just kind of following the shapes round. Again, not sort of too heavy on the detail, fairly simple. I then kind of wanted a little bit of a detail on the top, but not too much. So I copied up the shapes that I've made there on the flat to give me this profile, which is what I've then rotated. I'm just using this as a guide. And then I'm using some of the gutter pieces basically to look like almost like steel. They should look like smaller steel girders. I think they actually work quite well as that. And I think I'll probably use them again for that purpose. So just kind of following the shape that we've got. So this mirrors then the shape of the roof behind us. I think actually in the cut then I add a few more in because I think they're a bit too spread out. So I think I actually cut away, and yeah, so in this cut I've added a few more in, and it gives this kind of nice profile. The idea was slightly supposed to be that it sort of mirrors the horns of the Okapi, but yeah, just to kind of gesture at that, a little nod at that. So putting some bedding down. Again, as I said, I've now duplicated the structure, so we've got two kind of mirroring buildings going on, creating this nice kind of little S shape. Super simple. They're basically the same building, just copied twice. And as I said, if you want to use both of them, you can do. It wouldn't mean you need to kind of fill in the barrier on the second one. So I added a bit of aircon in. Then we start working on the barrier. I wanted to keep the barrier kind of fairly simple. In the elephant habitat, I've kind of went to town a bit with the barrier itself and the actual enclosing walls of the habitat. This time I kind of wanted to keep it simple. often when you see these kind of guys, these kind of animals in the zoos, they do have these more like pens rather than specific kind of made habitats for them. So this feels a bit more like a generic kind of pen that could have a different, could have a different animal in it. So the initial idea was just I wanted to keep it kind of symmetrical. So I make this kind of I've got a little couple of little bits of the details from the building, which I found were quite nice. It's quite a nice thing to do to keep it kind of feeling consistent and in theme with the building. Because often what we do is so we kind of just ignore the design of a building and then start making a wall or a fence, and it doesn't feel like it's a cohesive design. So that was what the idea was here, just to kind of follow those. You can see the foot of the wall is using that same coloured brick, and I'm using the black trim piece at the top there to follow that around. So actually when you see the second habitat, if you do download it off of the workshop, you'll only see, you won't see the barrier, but you will see that those kind of trim pieces as a guide for you. Drop in an Okapi as you have to do, and always, as I always seem to end up doing, realise immediately that I haven't made the habitat big enough. So I did actually go back and enlarge the habitat for them. Just doing a bit of terrain work then, so adding a bit of terrain painting in. I wanted probably more grass than it wanted. I wanted kind of grass all around the edges, but the amount that they want is actually pretty small. The habitat is mostly on the money in terms of the desires and the plants and stuff. Slightly off in a couple of places because there were a few plants that I used, which I always think the game is quite strict on those things about it not wanting, non-native species of plants. I get why they're doing that. That some things will be poisonous to certain species, but there's a few plants that I use often as kind of fillers. So the arrowwood, for example, is one I use all the time as a filler. So there's some of that in here, as well as the nettles. I'm pretty sure nettles would be found all over the world. I might be wrong on that, but they're in here anyway. So if you do download the habitat, there's a few places where I've kind of broken the rules. But you actually don't have a lot of plants available to you in the African pack, or in particularly the tropical version of the Africa pack, which is what the Okapi wants. So just in a little bit, feels a little bit bland at the moment. Feels a little bit lacking kind of depth and detail. So there's quite a lot more work done to kind of bring it to a lushness. What actually often helps these things, I find, is to go heavier on the surrounding area. So when you have this compromise of kind of guests want to be able to see the animals, so you don't want to go too heavy on the foliage. But then something like an Okapi is they're quite shy animals, so they do actually kind of want these spaces to hide in. So this is what we're doing here. A little bit of a nod to the kind of pygmy hut. It's creating this kind of little wooden structure that we then end up going backwards. I think I kind of test out to see the shape of it and that it could work as like a hut, and then I go back. And this is where we use something we shouldn't be using in the habitat, but the arrowwood bush, to create this kind of just foliage, a bit of leaf, generic leaf patterns. Basically, I think they are not specifically necessarily supposed to be an arrowwood bush. So we copy this around. It's very simple. Again, it's pretty simple. Just kind of drops it down, and we end up putting something in the middle to kind of make it look supported. Blending the edges in a bit, so a few bushes to kind of keep it looking soft. There's something in the middle, and actually nicely, I just checked there that the Okapis can actually still walk around it. I decided to put a bit of bedding in there, and use that in a few places to kind of for a bit of kind of leaf litter on the ground and that sort of thing. So a few bits and pieces of enrichment items and little, the hose. Everybody likes the kind of sprinkler thing. Every animal seems to like the sprinkler thing. And then doing a bit of detailing on the edges and the outside of that. So as I was saying, it's quite often that compromise between guests being able to see it see the animal and you wanting something to look lush and rich. If you just go heavy on the background, so the stuff that's kind of immediately outside the habitat, so do kind of surround your habitats with trees and foliage and all that sort of thing. And actually what it will look like when you're looking through the habitat is that you'll see all of that lush vegetation in the background. So that really, I find that really helps. And then you don't have loads of shade and stuff. So coming to the end of the speed build section in a few minutes, just putting an education board in, so a little bit of a sign, what makes for a happy Okapi. That was kind of the theme of this. I forgot to say actually, so this was a suggestion of one of my Discord community members, so Rem Exotics. That was one of her suggestions, or his suggestions, I'm not quite sure. So if you are someone who would like to suggest one of those, an animal, we're doing these kind of every week, so hop in the Discord, link in the down there. So yeah, that's pretty much coming to the end of this, guys. I think we'll be doing a grizzly bear next week, and I'm streaming that probably for the first time, the build process on Twitch on Tuesday, 7 PM UK. So enjoy this. Thanks for watching. My name is Toves. Catch you guys on the next one.